Hi, everybody. This is Kevin. I'm back on doing a Zoom chat. Now, the gentleman you can see there is, now let me try and get his name right, but after I've given you his proper name, I'm going to refer to him as Seth. Narendra Sethia. Is that right?
Well done. Well done.
Brilliant. Cracked it. First attempt. But everybody knows and refers to him as Seth, and that's what I'm going to be doing. Now, let me just tell everybody how I first got to know about Seth. Now, Seth commented on a video that Cynthia and I did on a New Year's Day 2 years ago, I think it was, when we walked around Hazelmere. And Seth saw the video and he made a comment on it and said that he'd lived in Hazelmere for about 17 years. So I commented back and thanked him very much. And from that, I found out that Seth has had a very interesting life, to say the least. And so I want to find out. I've got this here. Let me just show you this. This is a snapshot, just a snapshot of Seth's life. Now, there's 7 pages here, and it's amazing. His life has been absolutely amazing. Now, Seth, can you tell everybody just a little bit about yourself, where you were born, and
Okay.
Please, if you would.
Well, my father was Indian and my mother British. And I was born in Elsie Ingalls Maternity Hospital in Edinburgh in 1956. My father actually ran a cotton and wool company, which he had been involved with for several years. And that's how I came to be born in Scotland, which is where his company was based. When I was a few months old, we actually moved south, again, because of his work, took him further south. And we went down to Surrey and stayed in Hazelmere.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how I then came to spend pretty well the next 17 years of my life there, in the Surrey countryside.
Mm. And were you educated in Hazelmere? Would you have your education based there?
I went to what was in those days known as pre-prep school,
Mm-hmm.
in and close to nursery schools in Hazelmere.
Okay.
And then the first, I suppose, in inverted commas, proper school I went to when I was 6 years old was a place called Littlefield, just on the border of Hampshire, not too far from Lippok.
Uh-huh.
I spent 2 years at Littlefield School preparing myself for, in inverted commas again, the first boarding school, British boarding school. When I was 8 years old, I went there, and that was the sort of older brother of Littlefield, a school called Highfield,
Uh-huh.
also fairly close to Lippok. I attended Highfield from 1964 to 1966, when the headmaster suggested that I be removed from the school for untoward behavior, I believe it's known as.
All right. Okay.
And so I was expelled from Highfield, and fortunately was able to get into another boarding school called Copthorne in Sussex near East Grinstead.
Oh, okay.
So I went to Copthorne in 1966
Mm-hmm.
and spent 3 years there and had a very, I suppose, successful time there. Relatively well behaved, not beaten too often, and didn't get caught smoking cigarettes too often either, which was actually the primary reason I had been asked to leave Highfield when I was 10.
All right.
Um,
So you were smoking cigarettes at the age of 10?
Regrettably, in order to join a very popular, I believe they used to call them gangs, boys' gangs, at
Yeah.
Highfield School, actually run by 2 brothers with the surname Bell. I was told that in order to join their gang that used to hang out in the woods and fool around, I'd have to bring them a cigarette or two and a bit of booze. And so, being rather naive or the opposite, I ambled back to the main school building one afternoon at about 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon and went to the school matron's private quarters, um, knowing that she enjoyed a tipple or two, and figuring that if she was actually in her quarters, I'd pretend I had a headache and didn't feel well. And I went into her living room and this is absolutely true. It's actually written in the autobiography that I'm currently compiling. I took a packet of gold leaf cigarettes and half a bottle of cherry brandy, and turned around and went back to the woods and saw the Bell group, and they were shocked because within an hour of asking me to do these dreadful things in order to join the gang, I'd come back with cherry brandy and cigarettes, and so I was sort of looked upon as something of a hero, and I'm afraid that that's how my bad habit of smoking cigarettes started.
All right.
So from 1966 to 69, as I said, I was at Copthorne School in Sussex, and got really very deeply into academics. My parents were very strict about academics and insisting, I mean, even in school holidays, we had to work in our playroom for several hours a day. And I mean, I started Latin at the age of, I think about the age of eight and a half, and ancient Greek at the age of 10
Wow.
at Copthorne.
Yeah.
And so classics were my main subjects, and English and stuff. And so in 1969, when I was actually just under the age of 13, I was 12 years and 10 months, my parents said, well, it's time for us to be looking at the next school, a public school. And I was fortunate enough to get a scholarship to Harrow School, where I spent 3 days sitting the scholarship exams, and was pleased to get through. Obviously, there was a financial relief for that.
Yeah, yeah.
And so I left Copthorne School and went to Harrow School in the summer of 1969, and was placed in one of the private houses there and spent 5 terms, or about 1.5 years at Harrow. Not as long as I should have done. It was not a school that I cared for at all. I'd had brothers at Rugby and Eton. Harrow, to my mind, and still is like that in my mind today, although I know the school's changed a lot these days, was something out of the Dickensian era.
Right.
We were allowed 2 baths a week. The water was measured with a ruler to make sure it was no more than 18 inches deep. We were beaten regularly. There was an inverted commas, what's known as the fagging system, was alive and well. I was one of 4 boys of colour complexion in the school of more than 800 boys. The other three were princes.
Right.
The current Marquis of Blandford, Marquis Duke of Marlborough, who was then the Marquis of Blandford, Jamie Blandford, his name was, actually kicked me off the street one day, saying, "Get out of my way, Erastus."
Oh gosh.
Yes, and that is word for word. I will never forget it.
Mm.
Slapped me with his hand. He was 2 or 3 years older than me, and I believe that he's still the Duke of Marlborough. Earl Jermyn, Lord Bristol, who later developed a habit for cocaine in young men, was also in my house. And various other people. Prince Nicholas Obolensky, who I stabbed by mistake in the leg, and I'm still in touch with. But I apologized to him about 20 years ago. And various other people. The head of my house was actually my house captain, who was about 18, was Prince Sergei Cantacuzene Speransky. So, etc., etc. It was a very grand school, very high academic standards.
Yeah.
My classics teacher was actually a fellow who'd worked for Bletchley Park government secrets during World War II, and Mr. Morris Baum, and Professor Baum, one of the great modern experts on classics. His brother had actually captured the first Enigma submarine code machine from the Germans during World War II.
Amazing.
His own brother, Mr. Baum, Morris Baum, B-A-L-M-E.
Yeah.
So it was quite an interesting school for meeting characters and stuff. But I have always been a bit of a rebel. And as a youngster, I was very much against, I mean, I had to wear every Sunday a winged collar, tailcoat, pinstripe trousers. And we were only allowed to wear shirts with collar buttons on Tuesdays and Thursdays. The other days we had to wear gold studs, and an attached stiff collar. I mean, talk about archaic.
Yeah.
So I joined what's known as a gang with a fellow called Robert Chumney Clark, spelt Cholmondeley Clark, whose father was a lawyer and a recorder of London, and who lived at, I believe he lived in Moore Street in Sloane Square, and 23 Moore Street. And he and I became good friends, and a group of 7 of us got together, and we all enjoyed a cigarette here and there and that type of thing. But unfortunately, our passions expanded somewhat, and the school had its own small farm, and I used to love going to the farm to have a cigarette and drive a tractor at the age of 14, 13, this sort of thing. And but we were supposed to play organized sports every day, and sometimes if I'd missed it and run to the farm instead, I'd get a whacking. Anyway, this gang, we started doing what was known as the milk run because the school had its own farm with cattle. We used to actually provide all of our own milk every day. And a truck used to drive us at 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning down to the farm, pick up the milk, and go around every house on the hill, all the different houses with the boys in it, to deliver milk to the kitchen staff. And we started going early and instead to break into North London cigarette machines. And were extremely successful for several months. And I also wrote to the Chinese charge d'affaires and explained how very much in favor of their leader I was in order to try and obtain one of their little red books. And I was astonished one day when my school matron called me, said there's a huge package arrived from the Chinese charge d'affaires in London. And they'd written an amazing letter for me and 50 free red books. And I sold them each for 10 shillings apiece, which supported my rather unfortunate smoking habit. Anyway, going back to our stealing cigarettes, a bit naughty. Unfortunately, we were caught by the police one morning, and we sort of legged it and ran all over the place. And myself and Robert Chumley Clark hid outside the school library, but there was a huge, great barred gate that we couldn't get past. Damn. And the next thing, there was a flashlight shining at us, a torch, and a German Shepherd dog. And at the end of the dog was a policeman. And so he swore we were put into the back of a Black Maria van. I was 14, and we were taken down to North Harrow police station and locked up for the rest of the night. And the school bursar came at 7:30 in the morning to bail us out and took us to his house because it was too early for everybody to be, awake. So he gave us a cup of tea or something. And I still had 5 packets of cigarettes down my crutch. I was wearing a tracksuit. So I looked at him and said, "Do you smoke, sir?" He looked at me absolutely furious and said, "No, I do not." Anyway, that was the end of life at Harrow. Robert and myself actually ran away that afternoon, ran down across the school fields because it was a very huge school, lots of acres of ground. And we were camping by a small river not far from the farm. But somebody had seen us go down. A master from the school came, and we got thrown into the back of his car, driven back up to the school. I was pulled out through the back door, taken into my house, and I never saw Rob again in my life. I was placed with the housemaster, Mr. J.F. Leaf, the physics master, in fact, overnight, locked up, and removed from the school at 9 o'clock the next morning.
Oh, right.
And my father sent one of his Indian drivers in a black car to pick me up. And I was sent to London in a bit of a state, sat in front of my father, who was a very stern man. We never discussed things lightly. It was all about my education and go to your room and behave yourself.
Yeah.
But he sat in front of me and made some phone calls, and obviously had a good way of speaking, because the next thing, I was invited to go up to a place called Langley School in Norfolk, a much more down-to-earth school without the old-fashioned snobbery that Harrow had, and continue my education. So I was fortunate enough to finish my schooling. I went to Langley from 1970, and I left Langley in 1973 at the age of 17 years and 2 months. Managed to pass my O-levels and A-levels. And in the meanwhile, I have to go back actually a little bit. When I was 16, my parents were sort of egging me on and saying, "Well, what are you going to do with your life?" My 2 brothers, my father had encouraged all of us to become doctors. We were raised as vegetarians, and his religion was very no killing or anything like that. And he'd wanted to be a doctor, but when his own father found out that being a doctor in India, you had to dissect animals because they were so against hurting other creatures, his father refused to allow him to continue and sent him into the sent him into the family business.
Yeah.
And the family business was actually the jute business. Jute that you make rope from
Yep.
before
Yep.
man-made stuff came.
Yep.
And they were quite a wealthy family, and they owned one of the biggest jute businesses in Southeast Asia.
Oh wow.
And then cotton and wool on the side.
Mm.
So I was thinking, well, what the hell do I do? And one day when we were sitting at Langley School, they used to send people once you were 16, you could attend these lectures of job offers, people giving you suggestions.
Yeah.
And one was a naval fellow. And again, it's in my autobiography, and it's actually in the book titled Secrets of the Conqueror. And it's completely true. I sort of thought, well, that looks nice. I love swimming. My grandfather had been, my mother's father had been in the Royal Navy as a seaman in the 1920s. And I thought, the uniform looks rather good. I like that dark blue. And so I applied for the Navy, went down and to Portsmouth, where they had a couple of times a year, I think you had to spend 3 or 4 days and do all sorts of trials and lectures and this, that, and the other. And anyway, I got a scholarship to Dartmouth, the Naval College.
All right. Yeah.
But I couldn't go until the age of 18, and because I'd left school at just 17, there was a bit of a gap. And my father was friends with the owner and manager of a British shipping company. Actually, I think it was the oldest small cargo company in Britain since the 1700s, Elder Dempster lines. And they used to do mainly Africa. And so I was sent on a small cargo ship. It was a 6,000-ton general cargo ship, the Igori, from Liverpool, where I boarded her, down to West Africa at the age of 17.
Wow.
And I still have a few photographs. I went to Sierra Leone, and then Gabon, the French Congo, the Belgian Congo, up the River Congo, 100 miles to a place called Matadi. I mean, what an experience. And then down to Angola, Lobito and Luanda, and then back.
The fact that you mentioned just now that you were at Dartmouth,
yeah,
to join the Royal Navy. Let
right.
me just say to everybody that the part 2 of the video chats the Zoom chats that I'm doing with Seth is about a particular part of his time in the Navy. So we'll talk about it more in depth in part 2. But Seth, sorry to interrupt you there.
No problem.
You carry on.
So an amazing trip to Africa, and I had done well and actually been unofficially promoted from just a cadet. That's what I was, an officer cadet, to one stripe. I'll send you a photograph later. I've got a photograph of myself with one of the staff on board the ship with one stripe and an officer's cap at 17 on this cargo ship. And I was loving it. And I still had a few months to go before the Navy. And but my father was taken ill at home. And so my mother said, "You've got to come home."
Mm-hmm.
So I left the ship, actually from Northern Ireland was our last port, Belfast, and back to the UK. And spent the last few months in the UK working as a hospital porter in Hazelmere, Holy Cross Hospital.
Oh, yes, yeah.
And also at Whitehanger Nursing Home.
Oh, yes.
Which used to be down the Camelsdale Road and then up a hill.
Marley, up on top of Marley.
Marley Heights. Marley
yeah.
something, yes.
Yeah.
And that old people's home was terrible. I mean, it was one of those private.
Can you remember the name of the people that owned the place? Marley, Marley.
No, but I have a feeling, I may be wrong, but I have a feeling that they ended up being closed down and taken to court. The lady that owned it was not even a qualified nurse. It was the head matron or whatever you call her.
Yeah.
She had 4 or 5 what do they call sisters who were qualified nurses, and most of the rest were young, unqualified Irish and Spanish orderlies, and they were charging these people huge amounts. It was a private nursing home, Whitehanger.
It was, yeah.
And I remember it well. And if you're interested, later I'll send you the chapter from my autobiography that I've written about Whitehanger.
Yeah.
About some of the particular inmates. One was called Mr. Franks,
right,
who started a power company in somewhere near Hazelmere. Huge. He was a millionaire. And I'll write detail about that. One fellow, I used to have to feed them, clean them, bathe them, and
Wow.
change their sheets. And my co-worker was a Spanish orderly called Juan. And there was a fellow, an American called Mr. Brayfogle. Sorry if I'm going into too much
No,
detail.
no, you can't. No, no, no,
Mr.
carry
Mr. Brayfogle was a tall American who had Parkinson's disease, shaking a lot. And he was also a diabetic. But I used to feed him his cornflakes with sugar on it.
on.
Nobody told me not to.
Mm,
Nobody.
mm,
And anyway, to cut a long story short, he eventually died, and myself and Juan had to carry him back down to the parking lot. And he was huge, and there was a windy staircase at Whitehanger.
mm.
And we had to stop on the gravel car park for a rest and put the stretcher down, and his arm fell out. And the mortuary was just around the corner, but we wanted a cigarette, and I think we had a bottle of Guinness. And we'd forgotten that it was now visitors' hours. So these visitors drove into the parking lot and saw the two orderlies. We had short white coats and everything, a bottle of Guinness and a cigarette, and a dead body with an arm hanging out on the road. So must have been
I shouldn't laugh, but
I shouldn't either, but I am. I'm hilarious. And when I
it's
look back
almost
at that
something out of
scene,
a comedy sketch.
it's true. Anyway, so that was the end of it. Then I joined the Navy, and I
Yeah.
spent. I won't go into the detail, but I mean, I spent about 8 years then in the Navy, and for various reasons, I decided to resign from the Navy. I still have my resignation letter,
Yeah.
which is rather unusual because a formal resignation letter just says I have the honour to request that I be allowed to leave. But I have a whole paragraph, and again, I'll send it to you if you're interested, in saying I think that life is too short to just do one thing in life. It's a big world. We have so many opportunities to move around and do this, that, and the other. And I think it would be absolutely, and I've gone into the detail. And so it was with some surprise, I think, um, accepted. Although at first they sent me on another submarine and said, what about becoming a submarine captain or something? But anyway, I left the Navy. I had a very good friend. There was one who was a naval officer and actually ended up being the Queen's harbour master in London, and another submariner, and another one who was a civilian. And they'd been best friends. And for the few years that I'd known them, they lived in, one lived in near Farnham, a place called Green Tubs, in a little, I'll have to, sorry about my memory, place just up the road from Farnham. Anyway, and Bones, his nickname was, Anthony Blake. And they had plans to sail around the world. They were both fanatical sailors. But David Phillips, who was the Queen's Harbour Master eventually in Submariner, did something else instead. He went and got married. And I'm still in touch with them. And I was at their wedding, with raised swords at their wedding. And so Phillips backed out, and Bones, who was 6'7" and had a very deep voice, he was a bit pissed off. So one day, I was never really into sailing. I was good at navigation and loved my job in the Navy. But sailing boats, I used to go to the pub in Hamble when they went out on the boat to do their sailing thing. And I'd sit there in the pub and, take care of a few of the refreshments. And as they do. And so I decided, well, let's give this sailing a go one day. And we had a nice calm day. We were going across to the Isle of Wight, I think, from Hamble. And then Bones said to me, you wouldn't think about going around the world. And I have a very strange way of responding to this because I didn't think about it. I said, sure, yes, I'll resign when I go back. And that's what I did. That's when I submitted my resignation letter from the RN. So I left the Navy. My official last date was, I think, about the 15th of August, 1982. But I left the base, my last submarine base, about sometime in mid-July, and went to the Hamble. We spent a few weeks getting the yacht ready. We had a huge party at the Royal Southern Yacht Club, and left the UK on a 31-foot, 10-inch monohull wooden boat on the 8th of August, 1982. And we sailed down to France, Spain, Portugal, southern Spain, Gibraltar, then across to Morocco, the Canary Islands, and then across the Atlantic. We spent 29 days crossing the Atlantic. and arrived in Barbados, where my mother had lived since my father had died.
Oh, right. Okay.
He died 2 weeks after I joined the Navy, in fact.
Oh, no, no, no.
Yeah, in 1974. In fact, that was an extraordinary one because I was summoned by the head of my what's called a division, Sethia, which funnily enough was called St. Vincent Division because I now live in St. Vincent.
Yeah.
And my Commander Nicholas Cox, had all the other officers assembled. And the way I was informed, he looked at me and said, I had to come in my uniform and salute. And I had the Master at Arms, Bill Jackals, behind me. I thought, oh God, what have I done wrong there? Because I used to do a few things wrong in the Navy. And which we'll come on to when we do the Navy thing.
Yeah.
But Cox looked at me and verbatim, your father's dead, Sethia, but I gather you were expecting it. And that's how I was informed. Yeah, charming.
Gosh.
And God got his own back on him though, because he ended up becoming the naval attaché in West Pakistan.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, God's a good lady sometimes. She gave him his dues.
Yeah.
So so we sailed across the Atlantic, hung around the Caribbean, and we actually arrived in the Caribbean on the 8th of December, 1982. And after a month or two hanging around and sailing, and we had friends come out, people from Farnham, my oldest brother, and his relatively recent wife, and a few other friends, including a naval friend who ended up leaking my diary, a fellow called Simon Oakley. And he and his wife, and I have photographs of them also during that trip, which I think was in May or June 1983. And but by April, which is sort of the end of high season in the Caribbean, we were at the last big event of Caribbean sailing, which is the Antigua Sailing Week, which takes place, has done for 50 years or more, in April around Easter time. So we were up there, and I had picked up some. We didn't have much money left, and we had no, rich parents. Now, my mother had lost all of her money for various reasons, and no credit cards, and we'd set sail from the UK with £1,000, go around the world for the rest of our lives.
Yeah.
So we really needed to make a little money. And I'd found some cheap wine in Martinique. It was called Sakara, 8 francs a bottle, which that in those days was about $1 for a litre. It was disgusting wine, plastic top, no cork. But I took it up to Antigua, and my father had always told me, it doesn't matter if you don't have money. He had a very strong Indian accent. If you don't have money, Narendra, as long as you dress correctly and speak nicely, you will be okay. So I had taken my tailcoat and bow tie and collar with me, and we had an 8-foot plastic dinghy, and our oars had been stolen in Portugal, and we had one piece of 2x4 wood, which we used as a paddle. But we painted on the side Seth and Bones Vintners and put on our tailcoats and ties and paddled around Antigua with the cases of this disgusting wine. And the first vessel we got to was like an 80-foot luxury yacht with a captain, chef, and everybody and the owner on board. And he bought the lot, $15 a bottle.
Oh.
So a small profit.
Yeah, Seth, just one thing. I think what we're going to have to do, we're going to have to expand this to probably 3.
I'm sorry, I'm being a bit long-winded.
No. It's very interesting because there's a timer come up on my screen now, and I've got we've got just under 6 minutes.
Okay, that's fine, and that's good for me because I have to go out also. But I'm terribly sorry if I'm being long-winded.
No, not at all, not at all. It's so fascinating and I'm finding some of this hilarious.
Okay. Well, after Antigua, I actually met a lady. I was nuzzling up to a 65-year-old Italian lady, and because she used to buy me drinks. I think she was taken with me, and this was in Nelson's dockyard in Antigua. And one day, an English-looking lady, much younger, in her 30s, came by and gave me a wink and started giggling when she saw me arm in arm with this old Italian lady. And to get to the point, it turned out that her name was Susanna Baring Bank, the oldest bank in the UK, and titled relatives. And to cut a long story short, it turned out that Susanna Baring lived in St. Lucia, an island further south, just north of where I am now. And so what we did, we hooked up and sailed down to St. Lucia, and where she said she'd introduce us to all sorts of people. We did. And I'm actually godfather today to one of her children and in touch with her as recently as last week. Lives in Costa Rica now.
Yeah.
And so we went to St. Lucia, but I had to get work. Well, I wasn't really a yachty. Bones was the sailor. I'd done the navigation and all of that sort of stuff. But I'd had a bit of experience now. So I went to a yacht charter, a very small British yacht charter company, owned by a fellow who'd been from the Isle of Wight, whose father had been a boat builder in the 1920s and 30s. His name was Ted Bull. And he ran a charter company with a fellow who stayed in England called Alan Morgan, who had a company in Brighton, at Brighton Marina, who was also ex-RAF. They were both ex-RAF. Alan Morgan had been a wing commander and Ted Bull a squadron leader. But Ted Bull had worked his way up in the ranks. So they had this small old company, and I went in with my British naval officer's accent and smartened myself up and had a shave. And so the funny thing is, that's right, we had $10 left, Bones and myself, and we said, where should we go? Up to the supermarket to get some bread and drink and a bit of food, or Pat's pub just down the corner is having happy hour. And I don't have to tell you which one we chose.
Yes, of course.
And yeah, the supermarket was too long to go to anyway. So we went to the pub, and it turned out that this company that Ted Bull was managing, Tradewind Yacht Charters, they were having financial problems, and two of their other shareholders had come out. Chris Peer was one of them. He lived in Haywards Heath, 41 Gander Hill, and he was an accountant, and he was one of the 5 shareholders. And I got talking to him as well, with the British naval officer's accent. Had a long story short, I had a job the next morning.
Wow.
Because I'd been also in the accountancy thing in the Navy and had sailed across the Atlantic, but had done all the paperwork and all this stuff. And they wanted their books putting back together. And they used to operate out of an old ship's container, which had been turned into an office in the inner lagoon at Rodney Bay Lagoon. And they had about 10 boats. And so I ended up doing that, skippering boats with them. If somebody wanted a captain for a week, I would take them to the Grenadines and back. But doing all of their books and accounting. And that went on for more than a year. A year and 3 months later, I was made a director of the company.
Wow. At that point, I think, Seth, at that point, the time was very low.
Yes.
We'll end part 1 there.
Okay.
And we'll pick up part 2. You've got to remember this, pick up part 2 where we've just left off.